Homeless woman saved a child from fire minutes later. The black CEO millionaire came searching for her. The biting November wind whipped down the alley, a relentless thief stealing what little warmth Alara possessed. She pulled the threadbare blanket tighter around her son, Leo, whose small body trembled against hers in the cardboard shelter they called home. "It's okay, sweetie," she whispered, her own words turning to puffs of white smoke in the frigid air. "We just have to make it till morning." But what would morning bring? Another day of hunger, of feeling invisible, of fighting a tidal wave of despair that threatened to pull her under. It was in this moment of utter desolation, huddled in the shadows of gleaming skyscrapers, that the first scream ripped through the night, followed by the terrifying smell of smoke. "Stay here, Leo, don't move," she commanded, her voice sharp with a sudden primal fear. What could she possibly do, a woman with nothing, against a world that was literally on fire? Alara peered out from the alley's mouth, her heart hammering against her ribs. Across the street, orange flames licked greedily at the windows of a stately brownstone. People were scrambling out, their faces masks of terror, but one woman was shrieking, pointing back at a second-story window. "My son, he's still in there. Somebody help my baby." The crowd was a frozen tableau of horror, paralyzed by the inferno. Fire trucks wailed in the distance, but they felt a lifetime away. Alara looked at the window, then back at the sliver of the alley where her own son was hidden. Every instinct screamed at her to protect her own, to stay safe, to survive. But the mother's cries were a blade in her heart. She just couldn't stand by. Tugging her thin beanie down over her ears, she took a breath that tasted of ash and sprinted across the street, ignoring the shouts of the onlookers. The front door was impassable, a wall of flame and heat. Alara circled to the back, her eyes stinging. A sturdy oak tree grew near the house, its thick branches reaching like a desperate hand towards the second floor. Without a second thought, she began to climb. The bark scraped her raw, frozen hands, but she didn't feel it. Adrenaline was afire in her own veins. She hauled herself onto a thick limb that ran just below the window of the child's room. The glass was hot to the touch, but a section had already cracked from the heat. Shielding her face with her arm, she smashed the remaining shards with her elbow, the pain a distant, unimportant signal. Thick, black smoke billowed out, choking her. "Hello?" she coughed, her voice raw. "Can you hear me?" A small, terrified whimper answered her from the floor. She swung herself through the broken window, landing in a crouch in a room that was rapidly filling with suffocating smoke. A little boy, no older than Leo, was huddled under a bed, crying. "It's okay," Alara said, her voice miraculously calm. "I'm here to get you out. We're going to be brave together." She scooped him into her arms, wrapped him in his own superhero-themed blanket, and fought her way back to the window, her lungs burning, her vision swimming. The climb down was a blur of instinct and prayer. As her feet touched the ground, she ran, pushing the boy into his mother's waiting arms before collapsing to her knees, coughing, gasping for the clean, cold air. In the chaos of sirens, flashing lights, and emotional reunions, a tall, impeccably dressed man pushed through the crowd. He took off his own impossibly soft, dark cashmere coat and draped it over her trembling shoulders. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a deep, resonant rumble of concern. Before she could answer, before she could even process the kindness, a paramedic was helping her up. Dazed and disoriented, she only had one thought. Leo. She stumbled away, clutching the heavy, warm coat around her, and melted back into the shadows of the city, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. Julian Vance stood on the chaotic street, watching the spot where the woman had vanished. He was the owner of the brownstone, a property he was renovating as a community arts center. His sister and nephew had been doing a final walkthrough when the faulty wiring sparked. They were safe thanks to that woman, an angel in rags. He looked at his hands, which felt strangely empty without the weight of his coat. He had seen her face, streaked with soot and tears, but illuminated by a courage that had stunned him into silence. She hadn't asked for anything. She hadn't waited for thanks. She had saved a life and then simply disappeared, taking his $1,000 coat with her as the only evidence she was ever there. He turned to his head of security, a man named Marcus who had just arrived. "Find her," Julian commanded, his voice tight with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a profound, aching curiosity. "I don't care what it takes. Use every camera, every contact we have. I need to find the woman who was wearing my coat." Marcus nodded, already speaking quietly into his wrist. Julian's world was one of calculated risks, of assets and liabilities, of sterile boardrooms and a sprawling, silent penthouse that echoed with memories. For the last 3 years, since he'd lost his wife and daughter, his life had been a grayscale existence. But for a fleeting moment, watching that woman emerge from the smoke, a child in her arms, he had seen a flash of brilliant, impossible color. He had to find her. It wasn't about the coat. It was about understanding how someone with nothing could give everything, a concept so foreign to his carefully curated, empty world that it felt like a key to a door he had long forgotten existed. He needed to know her name. For 2 days, Alara and Leo huddled in their alley, the luxurious cashmere coat a bizarre and wonderful shield against the cold. It was a tangible piece of another world. It smelled faintly of sandalwood and success, a scent so alien in their corner of the city. Leo loved it, burying his face in its soft lining. "It's like a hug from a cloud, Mommy," he'd said, making Alara's heart ache with a mixture of love and guilt. The coat wasn't theirs. Every time she looked at it, she felt the weight of the owner's kindness and the shame of her own situation. She had to return it. It was the right thing to do, the only thing to do. She spent a day gathering the courage, washing her face and hands in the frigid water of a public restroom, trying to make herself look presentable. She found the address of Vance Architecture on a discarded newspaper and, with Leo's small hand tucked in hers, began the long walk to the heart of the city. The Vance Tower was a monument of glass and steel, a spear piercing the clouds. It was designed to intimidate, to proclaim power, and it worked. Alara felt smaller than ever as she stood before the gleaming revolving doors. "This is his castle, Mommy?" Leo asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Something like that, baby," she whispered, her resolve wavering. She clutched the neatly folded coat to her chest and pushed her way inside. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and silence. A severe-looking woman sat at a vast white desk, her eyes flicking over Alara's worn clothes with dismissive precision. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her tone making it clear she doubted it. I'm here to see Mr. Vance," Alara stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I need to return something of his." The receptionist's lips thinned into a bloodless line. "Mr. Vance doesn't take unscheduled appointments. If you'd like to leave a message, it's important," Alara insisted, her grip tightening on the coat. "He gave this to me at that moment." A side elevator dinged, and Julian Vance himself stepped out, deep in conversation with another man. His eyes swept the lobby, a habit of command, and then they stopped. They locked on Alara. Recognition dawned, followed by an expression she couldn't quite read. He excused himself and walked towards her, his expensive shoes making no sound on the polished floor. "You," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. "I've been looking for you." The receptionist's jaw went slack. Alara felt a blush creep up her neck, a hot wave of shame and exposure. "I just wanted to return your coat," she said, holding it out to him. "Thank you for letting me borrow it. It kept my son warm." Julian looked from the coat to her, then to the small boy peeking out from behind her legs. He didn't take the coat. "Keep it," he said. Then he looked at her directly, his gaze intense. "I owe you a debt I can't possibly repay. My nephew is safe because of you. Please, allow me to offer you a reward." He reached for his wallet, but Alara immediately shook her head, taking a step back. "No," she said, her voice firm, surprising even herself. "Absolutely not. I didn't do it for money. I did it because the child needed help. That's all." Julian was taken aback. In his world, everything had a price. Every action had an angle, a desired return on investment. This woman's simple, unshakable integrity was a confounding variable in the neat equation of his life. He saw the fierce pride in her tired eyes, the protective way she held her son close. Offering her money had been an insult, a clumsy miscalculation. He had to recalibrate. "Forgive me," he said, his tone shifting from magnanimous CEO to something more human. "You're right." That was crass. He paused, studying her, really seeing her for the first time. The exhaustion etched around her eyes, the worn-down soles of her shoes, the quiet dignity that clung to her like the coat she was still holding. "My name is Julian Vance. I'm Alara. And this is Leo." Leo gave a shy wave. "You're the cloud hug man," he said quietly. A flicker of a smile, the first genuine one in years, touched Julian's lips. "I suppose I am." He needed a new approach. An offer she couldn't refuse, not because it was generous, but because it addressed the one thing her pride couldn't deny, her son's well-being. "Alara," he began, his voice low and serious, "I have a proposition for you. Not a reward. A job. I live in a large, empty house. It requires upkeep. I need a live-in housekeeper. The position comes with a private suite of rooms, a fair salary, and all meals included. It would be a safe, warm place for your son." Alara stared at him, her mind reeling. A warm place, a safe place, a job. It was everything she prayed for every night. It was a lifeline thrown from a ship she didn't even know was sailing by. But her pride, that stubborn, battered shield, was still up. "I don't know anything about housekeeping in a place like that," she said, the excuse sounding weak even to her own ears. "I'm sure you're a fast learner," Julian countered smoothly. "And frankly, my current staff is impersonal. The house could use a more human touch." He was improvising, but the words felt true as he said them. His penthouse was less a home and more a museum of his former life, cold and silent. "Please," he added, the words stripped of all corporate authority. It was a simple, direct appeal. "Let me do this. Not for you, if your pride won't allow it, but for him." He nodded toward Leo, who was now staring up at the towering ceiling of the lobby with undisguised awe. The fight went out of Alara. For Leo. She would do anything for Leo. To give him a bed, a roof, a full belly. She would swallow her pride. She would face the unknown. She would walk into the lion's den if she had to. "Okay," she breathed, the word feeling momentous. A turning point on which her entire life was about to pivot. For Leo. "Okay." A wave of relief washed over Julian, so potent it surprised him. "Good," he said, his professional demeanor snapping back into place, a comfortable armor. "My driver is outside. He'll take you to get your things." Alara looked down at her single, tattered backpack leaning against her leg. "This is it," she said quietly. "We have everything with us." The simple statement landed like a physical blow. Julian's carefully constructed world tilted on its axis once more. He had associates with entire rooms dedicated to shoes they never wore, and this woman, this hero, owned nothing but what she could carry. He cleared his throat, masking the sudden, sharp pang of emotion. "Of course," he said gently. "Then let's go home." The penthouse was on the 80th floor, a glass box suspended in the sky. The elevator ride was silent and swift, making Alara's ears pop. When the doors opened directly into the living space, she gasped. One entire wall was a window overlooking the city, a sprawling galaxy of lights twinkling below them. The space was immense, filled with minimalist furniture in shades of gray, black, and white. It was stunningly beautiful and profoundly lonely. It didn't feel like a home. It felt like a showroom. "Wow," Leo whispered, his little voice echoing in the cavernous room. "Are we on a spaceship?" Julian's lips twitched. "It can feel like it sometimes. Your rooms are this way." He led them down a long, sterile hallway to a pristine white door. He opened it to reveal not just a room, but a suite. A cozy sitting area, 2 separate bedrooms, and a bathroom larger than any apartment Alara had ever lived in. The beds were piled high with soft duvets and pillows. A small, child-sized table and chairs were already set up in the corner of one room, complete with a box of new crayons and a stack of clean white paper. Alara's eyes filled with tears. She had expected a small servant's room in a basement. Not this. This was an act of kindness so extravagant it felt like a dream she was terrified to wake from. This is too much, she stammered, turning to face him. It's the least I could do, Julian said, his gaze fixed on Leo, who had made a beeline for the crayons and was already carefully selecting a bright blue one. There are clothes in the closets. I had my assistant estimate sizes. If they're wrong, we'll get new ones tomorrow. Make yourselves comfortable. Dinner will be ready in an hour. He turned and left, closing the door softly behind him, leaving Alara and Leo in their new, bewildering reality. Alara sank onto the edge of one of the plush beds, the mattress sighing under her weight. She watched Leo, who was now lying on his stomach, completely absorbed in his drawing. He wasn't cold. He wasn't hungry. He was safe. For the first time in over a year, a knot of pure, agonizing fear in Alara's chest began to loosen. She had made the right choice. She had to believe that. The first few days were a strange dance of cautious proximity. Alara threw herself into her work with a quiet, fierce determination. She cleaned the already spotless apartment, organized drawers that were perfectly ordered, and learned the complex workings of the high-tech kitchen. She was determined to earn her keep, to prove she was not a charity case. Julian was a ghost in his own home. He left before she and Leo woke up and returned long after Leo was asleep. They communicated mostly through polite, formal notes left on the marble kitchen island. Good morning. Please have my suit sent for dry cleaning, thank you. I have restocked the pantry, but the true agent of change was Leo. Unburdened by adult anxieties, he saw the vast, empty penthouse not as a sterile mausoleum, but as the world's greatest playground. And he saw its owner not as a formidable millionaire, but as a sad, lonely man who needed cheering up. He began leaving his drawings in places he knew Mr. Vance would find them. On his desk in the home office, on the pillow of his perfectly made bed, taped to the stainless steel refrigerator. They were simple, colorful pictures of smiling suns, lopsided houses, and stick figures holding hands. One morning, Alara found Julian in his home office, long before he was due to leave for work. He wasn't working. He was standing in front of a corkboard on the wall, carefully pinning up one of Leo's drawings. A portrait of a very tall man with spiky hair holding hands with a small boy under a rainbow. He didn't notice her at first. She saw a look on his face she hadn't seen before. A soft, unguarded vulnerability. It made him seem younger, less like a titan of industry and more like just a man. He turned and saw her, and for a moment, he looked almost embarrassed, like a boy caught with a secret. He's quite the artist, Julian said, his voice a low rumble. He is, Alara agreed, a small smile touching her lips. He draws what he wants to see in the world. Julian looked back at the drawing, at the two stick figures holding hands. Yes, he said, more to himself than to her. I suppose he does. That small moment was a crack in the wall between them. The next evening, Julian came home early. Alara was in the kitchen preparing a simple stew for her and Leo. The homey smell of simmering vegetables a stark contrast to the apartment's usual scent of glass cleaner and nothingness. Leo was at the kitchen island, diligently helping by stirring a bowl of water with a spoon. Julian stopped in the doorway, watching them. The scene was so warmly domestic it was like a punch to the gut. It was a phantom limb of a life he used to have. That smells good, he said, stepping into the room. Leo's face lit up. Mr. Vance, we're making monster stew. It scares away the bad dreams. Julian looked at the pot, then at Alara. Is there enough for one more monster? He asked. Alara's heart did a little flutter. Of course, she said. That night, the three of them ate together at the massive dining table designed for 16. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable. Leo chattered on about his day, about a pigeon he saw in the park, about the different colors of the cars on the street below. He filled the vast, empty space with life. After dinner, as Alara was tucking Leo into bed, she noticed him clutching a small, framed photograph he'd found on a bookshelf. It was of a beautiful woman with a radiant smile and a little girl with Julian's eyes. "Who are they, Mommy?" Leo asked. Alara's breath caught. I think they were Mr. Vance's family," she said softly, her heart aching for the man down the hall. This was the source of his sadness, the ghost that haunted this beautiful, empty home. This was the first piece of the puzzle of Julian Vance. The quiet dinners became a regular occurrence. They were the one time of day when the lines blurred, when he wasn't just the boss and she wasn't just the housekeeper. They were just Julian and Alara, with Leo as their joyful, chattering bridge. They would talk about simple things. Leo's latest artistic masterpiece, the weather, a funny story Alara would tell about her son's logic. Julian found himself opening up in small, surprising ways. He talked about his work, not the billion-dollar mergers, but the passion he had for design, for creating spaces that could change how people felt. He learned about Alara, too. He learned she had a quick wit and a quiet strength that was more formidable than any executive he'd ever faced in a boardroom. He learned she had wanted to be a teacher before life had taken a different path. One evening, after a particularly long and stressful day, Julian came home to find the apartment quiet. He walked past Leo's room and heard Alara's soft voice. He paused, listening. She was telling Leo a bedtime story, her voice a soothing melody. But then, Leo asked a question. "Mommy, where's my daddy?" Julian's heart clenched. He had never dared to ask. The silence stretched on, and then Alara spoke, her voice thick with an old, deep sorrow. "Your daddy is a star now, sweetie. He was a brave soldier, and he went up to the sky to watch over us. Whenever you see the brightest star, that's him, saying hello. Is he with Mr. Vance's family?" Leo asked with the innocent, heartbreaking logic of a child. Julian could hear Alara's sharp intake of breath. "Yes, baby," she whispered. "I think he probably is. They're all up there together, being friends." Julian backed away from the door, his own ghost swirling around him. He retreated to his office and poured a drink, the amber liquid doing nothing to numb the ache in his chest. He looked at the photo on his desk, the one of his wife, Sarah, and their daughter, Lily. They had been his entire world. A drunk driver had taken them from him 3 years ago, and in the process had taken all the light from his life. He had built this sterile fortress around his heart, convinced it was the only way to survive the pain. But now, Alara and Leo were chipping away at the walls, not with a sledgehammer, but with quiet kindness and crayon drawings. He was terrified, and for the first time in a long time he felt a flicker of hope. A little while later, there was a soft knock on his office door. It was Alara holding 2 mugs. "I thought you might want some tea," she said, her expression gentle, understanding. She had clearly heard Leo's question and knew what it must have stirred in him. She wasn't prying, just offering a quiet moment of solidarity. He nodded, and she came in, setting a mug on his desk. She didn't leave. She stood by the large window, looking out at the city lights. "He asks about his father a lot," she said softly, breaking the silence. "His name was Mark. We were high school sweethearts. He enlisted right after Leo was born. He never even got to meet him. An IED in Afghanistan." Julian finally looked up from his glass, meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling horribly inadequate. "My wife, Sarah, and my daughter, Lily." He found himself saying, the names feeling foreign on his tongue after years of locking them away. "It was a car accident. We were coming home from her parents' house. I was driving." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and raw. It was the first time he had said those words aloud to anyone other than a therapist. Alara's eyes filled with an empathy so profound it felt like a physical touch. She didn't offer platitudes or empty comforts. She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his pain, a shared understanding of a grief too large for words. "It wasn't your fault, Julian," she said, using his first name for the first time. Felt right. In that moment, sharing the geography of their deepest wounds, they were equals. "And Mark's death wasn't yours." They stood in a comfortable silence for a long time, the shared quiet more intimate than any conversation. The walls of the glass box in the sky seemed to melt away, leaving just two lonely souls finding a fragile, tentative connection in the dark. It was the night everything changed. The unspoken truth of their pasts was now a bridge between them, and they began to cross it, step by cautious step. The weeks that followed were filled with a gentle, blooming warmth that thawed the permafrost in Julian's heart. The penthouse began to transform. A brightly colored rug appeared in the living room. A pot of cheerful yellow flowers sat on the kitchen island. Leo's artwork was no longer confined to the corkboard, but was proudly displayed on the refrigerator, held up by whimsical animal magnets Alara had bought. The house was slowly, surely becoming a home. Julian found himself rearranging his schedule, pushing back meetings, delegating tasks he once would have micromanaged, all for the simple pleasure of being home in time for dinner. He looked forward to Leo's breathless daily reports and the quiet, intelligent conversations he had with Alara afterward. He was discovering the woman behind the quiet housekeeper. She was funny with a dry, observational humor that often caught him by surprise. She was fiercely intelligent, her insights on world events sharp and compassionate. He started to wonder how a woman like her had ever ended up on the streets. One Saturday, on an impulse, he announced they were going on an outing. "The city aquarium is opening early for a private donor event," he said, trying to sound casual. "I thought Leo might enjoy it." Leo's whoop of joy was answer enough. At the aquarium, Julian watched Alara as much as he watched the fish. He saw the wonder on her face as they walked through the glass tunnel, with sharks and rays swimming silently overhead. He saw the patient way she answered Leo's millionth question about why clownfish are funny. He saw her laugh, a full, genuine sound that made something in his chest ache in the best possible way. While Leo was mesmerized by a tank of glowing jellyfish, Julian found himself standing next to Alara. "Thank you for this," she said, her eyes still on the hypnotic dance of the creatures. We've never been able to do anything like this." "I should be thanking you," Julian replied, his voice sincere. "I haven't done anything like this in years. I'd forgotten what it was like." Their shoulders brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of electricity through him. He looked at her, at the soft curve of her smile and the light in her eyes, and was hit with a realization that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was falling for her. He was falling for her kindness, her strength, her spirit. He was falling for the way she saw the world, not as a place of loss, but as a place of quiet wonders, like glowing jellyfish in a dark room. Later that week, as she was doing the laundry, a small, worn book fell out of the pocket of her jeans. It was a slim volume of poetry by Mary Oliver. He picked it up. The cover was soft with wear, the corners dog-eared. He opened it to a random page and read a line she had underlined. "Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" He looked up as she came back into the room, a blush rising on her cheeks when she saw him with her book. "It's silly," she said, reaching for it. "No," he said, holding it for a moment longer. "It's not." He looked at her, the underlined question hanging in the air between them. He was a man who planned everything, who had 5- and 10-year strategies for his business, his investments, his entire life. But he hadn't had a plan for his own wild and precious life since the day Sarah and Lily died. He had just been existing, surviving. Now, for the first time, he felt like he might want to live again. And he knew, with a certainty that shook him to his core, that he wanted to live it with her. The air crackled with unspoken feelings. He took a step closer, his gaze dropping to her lips. She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. The moment was there, ripe and ready. And then the sharp, imperious buzz of the private elevator shattered the spell. Both of them jumped back as the doors slid open. A woman stood there, tall and elegant, dressed in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than Alara had earned in her entire life. Her silver hair was perfectly coiffed, her expression frozen in a mask of cold disapproval. Her eyes swept over the apartment, taking in the colorful rug and the flowers on the counter with a visible sneer. Then her icy gaze landed on Alara. "And who," she said, her voice dripping with disdain, "is this?" Julian's face hardened. Eleanor, he said, his tone flat and cold. What are you doing here? I'm here to see my grandson's memory is being honored, Julian, she said, her eyes never leaving Alara. It seems I've arrived just in time. It was Eleanor Vance, Sarah's mother. And she looked at Alara as if she were something she had found on the bottom of her shoe. Eleanor Vance moved through the apartment like a conquering general inspecting a disappointing new territory. She was the chairwoman of the Vance Claymore Foundation, the massive charitable organization Julian had established in his late wife's name. She wielded her grief like a weapon and her position like a crown. Her presence sucked all the warmth from the room, leaving a chilling vacuum in its wake. I see you've made changes, Eleanor said, running a manicured finger over the cheerful flower pot on the island, as if checking for dust. The place has become so cluttered. Julian stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Eleanor and Alara. Eleanor, this is Alara. She works for me. Alara, this is my mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance. Alara nodded politely, murmuring a quiet, "It's nice to meet you." Though the sentiment felt like a lie, Eleanor's eyes raked over Alara again. A slow, insulting appraisal. "Works for you?" she repeated, the words laced with disbelief. I see. Just then Leo, hearing the new voice, came running out of his room, holding up a new drawing. "Mommy, look, I drew a spaceship for Mr. Vance." He skidded to a halt when he saw the stranger, his bright smile faltering. Eleanor looked down at Leo as if he were a strange species of insect. The sheer presence of a child in this shrine to her daughter's memory was clearly an affront. "And this, I presume, is part of the staff?" she asked, her voice dangerously sweet. The cruelty of the question was staggering. Julian's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "That's enough, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Leo is Alara's son. They live here. They live here." Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. "In my daughter's home? With her things? How could you, Julian? Have you no respect for her memory?" "Sarah is gone," Julian said, his voice strained. "This is my home now. Is it?" she shot back. "Or is it just a convenient place to house your new charity project?" She turned her venomous gaze back to Alara. "Tell me, dear, what is it that you do for him exactly?" Before Alara could answer, Julian cut in. "She brings life to this place, something you wouldn't understand. Now state your business, Eleanor." "I have things to do." Eleanor's lips tightened into a grim line. She knew she had pushed too far for now. She shifted tactics. "The Foundation's annual gala is in 2 weeks, she announced, her tone all business. "The press will be there. The board expects you to make a significant speech. It's crucial we project an image of stability and dedication to Sarah's legacy. I trust you won't do anything to compromise that." The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. She was warning him. Her gaze flickered to Alara one last time, a clear message. Get rid of her. With a final, withering glare, she turned and swept back into the elevator, leaving a trail of icy silence behind her. The moment the doors closed, Alara started trembling. All the warmth and safety she had begun to feel evaporated, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. "I'm so sorry," Julian said, turning to her, his face a mask of fury and regret. "She has no right." "She's right," Alara interrupted, her voice barely a whisper. She couldn't meet his eyes. "What am I doing here? In her daughter's home? This is wrong. I've been living in a fairy tale." "No, Alara, that's not true," he insisted, reaching for her. But she flinched away. The spell was broken. The class divide, the chasm between their worlds, had been ripped wide open again. She was the homeless woman, the charity case. He was the millionaire. Eleanor was the gatekeeper of that world, and she had just made it clear that Alara would never be allowed inside. "I should pack our things," she said, her voice hollow. "It's better this way, before Leo gets any more attached." "Attached?" Julian's voice was incredulous. "Alara, we are attached. I'm attached." He finally said it, the words tumbling out, raw and unplanned. I'm falling in love with you. Alara's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock and pain. Don't say that, she pleaded. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Your world will never accept us. That woman, she'll destroy you. She'll use me and my son to create a scandal that will ruin your company, your reputation, everything you've built in your wife's memory. I don't care about the company, he said, stepping closer again, his eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. Not if it means losing you. You have to care, she insisted, tears welling in her eyes. You have a legacy to protect, a foundation in her name. What would people say? Grieving CEO takes in homeless woman and her child. It sounds sordid. She'll make it sound sordid. I won't do that to you. I won't be the reason your late wife's name gets dragged through the mud. She was thinking of him, even now, sacrificing her own chance at happiness to protect his legacy. Her selflessness was the very thing that made him love her, and it was the very thing that was about to tear them apart. He saw the resolve hardening in her eyes. She was slipping away from him, retreating behind her walls of pride and self-preservation. He was about to lose the first good thing that had happened to him in 3 years, all because of Eleanor's poisonous prejudice. He had to do something, but he didn't know what. The battle lines were drawn. On one side was Eleanor, the past, and the crushing weight of public opinion. On the other was Alara, Leo, and a fragile, burgeoning hope for the future. And Julian was trapped in the middle, facing a crisis that would force him to choose, once and for all, what he was willing to fight for. That night was the longest of Julian's life. After their conversation, Alara had retreated into her suite, a polite but impenetrable wall between them. He could hear the muffled sounds of her movements, the quiet opening and closing of drawers. She was packing. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He paced the vast living room, the city lights below mocking his turmoil. Eleanor's threat echoed in his mind. She was not an idle woman. She was ruthless. If he kept Alara, Eleanor would wage a war in the press. She would paint Alara as a manipulative gold digger and him as a fool or worse, a predator. The foundation, Sarah's legacy, would be tarnished, perhaps irreparably. For a moment, the cold, calculating CEO he used to be surfaced. The logical choice was clear: cut his losses. Give Alara a generous severance, set her up in a nice apartment somewhere far away, and return to his quiet, orderly, empty life. Protect the legacy. It was the sensible thing to do. But then he saw Leo's drawing of the spaceship on his desk. He thought of Alara's quiet laughter, the smell of her stew in his kitchen, the way her eyes lit up when she looked at the jellyfish. He thought of the line from her book, "What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" Was he going to spend the rest of it honoring a memory, living in a museum of the past? Or was he going to fight for a future that was messy and complicated and terrifying, but one that was filled with light and love and a little boy's crayon drawings? The choice was no choice at all. He knew what he had to do. The next morning, Alara came out of her room, her face pale but resolute. Leo was with her, holding his small backpack, his expression confused and sad. The single, tattered backpack she had arrived with was by the door. "We're ready," she said, her voice brittle. "Thank you for everything, Julian. I'll pay you back for the clothes as soon as I can." Julian was standing by the window, dressed in a sharp, dark suit. He looked not at her, but at his watch. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But I have to go somewhere. The foundation gala is tonight. And you're coming with me." Alara stared at him as if he had lost his mind. "What? No. Julian, that's insane. Eleanor will be there. The press, the board. They'll eat me alive." "Let them try," he said, a dangerous glint in his eye. "It's time I stopped letting Eleanor dictate my life by weaponizing my wife's memory. Sarah was a kind, compassionate woman. She would have loved you and Leo. Eleanor's version of her legacy is a cold, stone monument. I'm going to remind them tonight that Sarah's true legacy is about love and kindness, not judgment and exclusion." He crossed the room and gently took her hands. I need you by my side, Elara. Please, trust me. Looking into his eyes, seeing the unwavering certainty there, Elara felt a flicker of her own courage return. For weeks he had been her protector. Now he was asking her to be his partner, to stand with him. It was the most terrifying and wonderful thing anyone had ever asked of her. She took a deep breath. Okay, she whispered. I'll go. The hours before the gala were a blur. A stylist Julian had called, a kind, discreet woman, arrived with a rack of beautiful gowns. Elara chose a simple, elegant navy dress. As she looked at her reflection, with her hair styled and a touch of makeup on, she saw not a homeless woman, but a woman who looked strong, poised, and worthy. When she walked out into the living room, Julian was waiting. He was breathtakingly handsome in his tuxedo. His eyes widened when he saw her, and he was silent for a moment. You are, he breathed, the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. He offered her his arm. Shall we? The ballroom was a glittering ocean of wealth and power. Chandeliers dripped crystals from the ceiling, and the air hummed with the quiet murmur of the city's elite. When Julian walked in with Elara on his arm, a hush fell over the room. Every eye turned to them. Whispers erupted like brush fires. Elara could feel hundreds of eyes on her, judging her, dissecting her. Her hand tightened on Julian's arm, her knuckles white. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. Just breathe, he whispered in her ear. You belong here more than any of them. They walked straight toward the head table, where Eleanor was holding court. Her face, when she saw them together, was a mask of pure fury. She stood up as they approached, her body rigid. Julian, she hissed, her voice low and venomous so only they could hear. What is the meaning of this? I warned you. Get this woman out of here before you humiliate yourself and your wife's memory any further. The only person bringing humiliation to Sarah's memory tonight is you, Eleanor, Julian replied, his voice equally quiet but steel-edged. He pulled out a chair for Elara, right next to his own, a place of honor. Elara is my guest. She is here with me. If you have a problem with that, you are welcome to leave. Eleanor was speechless, her face contorted with rage. She had lost control, and she knew it. The dinner was an exercise in tension. Elara ate little, feeling the weight of the room's curiosity. But Julian never left her side, keeping up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out people, telling her funny anecdotes, effectively building a protective bubble around them. Finally, it was time for his speech. He walked to the podium, the room falling silent in anticipation. He looked out over the crowd, his gaze calm and commanding. Thank you all for coming tonight to honor the memory of my late wife, Sarah Vance. He began, his voice resonating through the ballroom. For 3 years, this foundation has done incredible work in her name. But I fear that in our efforts to build a legacy of stone and steel, of galas and endowments, some of us have forgotten what Sarah truly stood for. He paused, and his eyes found Eleanor in the crowd. Sarah's legacy was not about exclusion, or judgment, or social standing. It was about kindness. It was about seeing the humanity in everyone, regardless of their circumstances. It was about opening your heart to those in need. He then looked directly at Elara, his expression softening, his voice filling with an emotion that captivated the entire room. Recently, I was reminded of that legacy in the most profound way possible. I met a woman who, with nothing to her name, risked her life to save a child from a fire simply because it was the right thing to do. A woman who, when offered a reward, refused it because her compassion has no price tag. A woman who has taught me more about strength, integrity, and love in the last few months than I have learned in my entire life. A collective gasp went through the room. That woman is Elara, and I am the luckiest man in the world because she is standing by my side tonight. He turned fully to her, ignoring the hundreds of onlookers, the flashing cameras of the press. Elara, you and Leo brought light back into my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever. You rebuilt my broken heart. You made my house a home. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my one wild and precious life showing you and your son how much. He walked away from the podium, strode directly to her, and got down on one knee. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. The room was utterly silent. "Alara," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "will you and Leo be my family? Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Alara's face. All the fear, all the doubt, had been washed away by his incredible public declaration of love. In front of the whole world, he had chosen her. He had defended her. He had loved her. "Yes," she choked out, nodding. "Yes, Julian." 1,000 times. Yes, Julian slid the stunning diamond ring onto her finger as the ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. He stood, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her, sealing their future in front of everyone. In the back of the room, Eleanor Vance, defeated and alone, slipped out a side door, her reign of ice finally over. 1 year later, the penthouse was almost unrecognizable. It was filled with laughter, the smell of baking cookies, and the happy clutter of a family. Leo's drawings covered every available surface, a vibrant testament to the love that now lived there. Julian was on the floor, helping Leo build an elaborate castle out of blocks. His suit jacket discarded on a chair, his tie loosened. He was smiling more than he ever had in his life. Alara watched them from the kitchen, her heart so full she felt it might burst. She was no longer just a housekeeper. She was Julian's partner in every sense of the word. She was finishing her teaching degree online, and together, they had restructured the foundation, shifting its focus to providing housing and educational resources for homeless families. They had turned their personal fairy tale into a real-world force for good. That evening, as Leo slept soundly in his bed, Julian and Alara stood by the great window, looking out at the city lights. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "A year ago, I was standing in this same spot, a ghost in my own life," he said softly. "And then you walked in and turned everything from black and white to color. You saved us, Julian," she whispered, leaning back against him. "No," he corrected her gently. "We saved each other." He turned her around to face him, his expression serious and full of love. "The ring was a promise," he said, "but I want to make it official. Let's get married next month. A small ceremony, just us, Leo, and a few friends. What do you say?" She smiled, her eyes shining. "I'd say it's about time, Mr. Vance." He laughed and kissed her. A long, sweet kiss filled with the promise of 1,000 happy tomorrows. They had both been survivors, adrift in their own lonely oceans of grief and hardship. But by a miracle of fate, or perhaps the simple, powerful magic of a child's pure heart, their ships had found each other in the night. Together, they had built a new harbor, a safe and loving port against any storm. They had learned that true wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios or square footage, but in the simple, profound currency of love, family, and a second chance at a wild and precious life. We hope this heartwarming tale has touched your soul. The story of Alara and Julian reminds us that the greatest acts of kindness often come from those who have the least to give, and that love has the power to heal even the deepest wounds. It shows that family is not just about who you are related to, but about who you choose to fight for and stand beside. If you were inspired by their journey from despair to happiness, please like this video, share it with your friends and family, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more soul-stirring stories that celebrate the very best of the human spirit. Your support helps us continue to bring these uplifting tales to the world. Click that subscribe button and let us know in the comments what part of Alara and Julian's story resonated with you the most. Thank you for watching, and remember, a single act of courage and compassion can change the world.